Well, good evening. If you're watching this evening, you're probably catching up. Who knows? But welcome to We Need to Talk About Sunday, where we talk about the Sunday service that's just happened at Romsey Methodist Church. I'm Jason.
And I'm Joe.
And this evening we're joined, and Brian led our service, or Brian led the service on Sunday. We're reimagining this week. So the fourth of our services, we've had Reemerging, I've forgotten. Never mind. Already, I've forgotten. I had them all in my head. It's gone. Reemerging. Come on, we must be able to remember them.
Refocusing.
Thank you. Yep. Refocusing.
Why are you doing this to us, James?
Yeah, I don't know. That was a terrible idea, wasn't it? Someone will pop it in the chat and we'll remember. But yes, the next of our services, and we were reimagining. And so, yeah, we're going to put some questions this evening to Brian, have a bit of a chat about the service, and see sort of go a bit further with the theme of reimagining. And Joe's going to ask you some questions.
I'll kick off then. Yeah. So, Brian, our first question is pretty simply, why does the church need reimagining?
I think if you look at the story of the church over the years, there have been various critical points where there has been upheaval of one sort or another. Sometimes it's been acrimonious. Sometimes it's seemed like a fairly gradual, but there have been significant changes. And I go on to talk about change in the service, but I really think that we've just come, or are still coming through, a momentous period in the life of the church. And it's no bad thing. In fact, it's more than that. It's a very necessary thing for us to take stock of where we are. And what I tried to do on Sunday was to establish 4 principles. It seemed to me to be a bit absurd and a bit rude for me to come in as a visitor and tell in practical terms what I thought Romsey Church ought to be. I've done that in the past, in the 2 years that I was closely associated, but now I'm a visitor and stand back. It was the principles, and reimagining the church seems to me to be an important principle for momentous moments, which is we're in.
How are we doing, by the way, since you last came?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I was involved in the physical change of one part of the church, but the technology that you've embraced, that we're using now, things like the eco church, we looked in my 2 years at the possibility of putting solar panels on the roof, and went away from it because at that time it was too expensive and there were big questions. You've done it, and it is changing, and the way you're ordering the church now, and this sort of event in itself is indication that you are changing.
Yeah, I think there's plenty to celebrate in terms of the space being a lot more usable as well. The amount of groups and communities that we've managed to welcome into the church since the renewal is super. But anyway, back to Sunday then, Brian. You spoke about 4 specific things: learning, growing,
changing. Learning, changing, growing.
That's it. Learning, changing, growing, and loving.
It's the lists. We should be doing the lists.
Yeah, we really shouldn't be doing lists. No. Yeah. But ultimately, my first point is just on the first one anyway. It's on learning. And basically, I just wanted to ask, what does that look like for me, or a member of the church, or just generally a disciple? What does learning look like?
I think there's a basic principle here. If we're not careful, we are looking forward people who are what I call biblically illiterate. I want people who read and learn to know the Bibles. That's the baseline for me. But I think also we need to learn how to apply it. If you just read the scriptures, you've got a flat earth with the sun revolving around us. It's there. It isn't that. We have to be in the business of interpreting for the 21st century what the scriptures are actually saying to us. And the point that I made is that the very definition of a disciple is one who learns. Jesus supremely is the teacher, and alongside that, his word, and discipleship is learning from Jesus and from one another, because the Christian experience, and that's partly what I believe about the church, is a sharing the process of learning and growing.
I think there's something that goes with that. I think a lot of people often look at the Bible or look at Christian history and think, oh, it's stuff that's happened. We kind of have learned everything we can about that, and kind of forget that there's still archaeology happening. We had Chris Sinkinson come and talk to us about that. They're still digging stuff up in Israel. They're still learning more all the time that we didn't know as well. So it's not just that. Not just us learning in terms of, I need to learn more about the Bible. We all are learning all the time because more stuff is being learned.
Yeah, and just some of the basics of physics, the seed changes that have happened, astrophysics, geology, all sorts of things are constantly changing. We're not standing still. The world of medicine, the world of communication, it's always changing, and we need to be on the ball with our learning processes about where God is leading us.
I think because we live in an ever-changing world as well. I remember watching an episode of QI where they ended up saying that more of the facts that they had done in their past shows were now wrong or irrelevant because they've been superseded by new facts, which I thought was fascinating. I don't know how that works, but well, should we jump on to changing?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
You want to go?
Is it my question? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. So I thought I'd be a bit play devil's advocate a bit with this question actually, because your second point you said that we need to keep changing as a church, and sort of my devil's advocate kind of question is, well, why? What's wrong with us saying, well, we do things the way we do? Maybe that's not appealing to people. Maybe, but why don't we just carry on doing what we're doing? Maybe we let our part of the church decline. We close it down when we're done. Let someone else pick up the slack because we like what we're doing. What's wrong with that as an approach?
Because, as Joe said a minute ago, the whole world is changing all the time. We're changing physically, mentally, and to stand still, in truth, is to go backwards because of the pace of change that is constantly overtaking us and moving forward.
Do you see the change as a good thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not unqualified, but generally the principle of change, and that's where I started with the principle. The principle of change is essential. Stand still and you die.
And it's necessary. I remember thinking about it a while back about you remember at school you learn, is it Mr. Gren or Mrs. Greffs about what makes something alive?
Mrs. Nerg.
Mrs. Nerg, you did. Okay, it's an acronym for movement, respiration, something else I can't remember. But the idea was if something is doing all those things, it's alive. But the core of all of them is change, and of course, if something's not changing, it's dead. If my body stops changing, it's because it's stopped doing anything. It's just an interesting way of thinking about it, I think.
Well, we've go on, Jace.
Oh well, there's that. I mean, you talked about the decline in Methodist numbers and Methodist ministers. I just wondered if I'd be interested to get both of your thoughts on why do you think Methodist Church is shrinking? What's your personal take on that?
Partly because we have stood still and not been prepared to change. Partly because we've lost our confidence. I quoted those two hymns. One of them, "Oh, let me commend my Saviour to you."
Yes.
We've had such a loss of confidence, and it's due to all sorts of factors, and it would take a whole evening to even touch the surface. But because we are no longer confident as Christian people, we don't tell the good news. And I don't just mean in word, I mean in action as well. We are reluctant, hesitant Christian people, and we've got to rediscover courage to speak out. We're afraid of ridicule. We're not going to get persecuted in this country. We are going to be ridiculed, and people can't. You look at the average portrayal on television of a clergyman. We're a figure of fun, and it riles me that we don't have credibility. And I think the church, because it fails to speak out, has lost its right to speak and lost its standing in today's society and world. What is there attractive for people to come and join? If you're outside looking in, you've got to be pretty convinced to actually come in. We don't tell a good story.
What would you say, Joe, of your experience of, because obviously you're quite new to Methodism, I guess, as a
I mean, I was brought up in an Anglican church, and then I went to school at a Catholic church, and by that point I'd had enough of that. And then went to Portswood in Southampton, and then finally settled on Romsey. So yes, I am new to Methodism, but I think I do think that there's an element of church having to speak, hopefully trying to find this idea of faith and God being at the center, and that it's a very personal sort of it's a personal thing to find. But I do think that as a church, it's easy to get sort of swept up in the community part of church, of the sort of being parts of groups and just going along because it's nice and it's feel good and it's a nice, it's a nice group to be around, that sort of thing. Whereas and I think that's part of why, part of why I like doing the podcast, because it digs that little bit deeper, beyond just, isn't it great to get together sort of thing.
So, because I mean, the reason I asked both of you, because I mean, my personal mission in the Methodist Church is to change it. It sounds a bit big-headed, but a bit mad. But I had a unhelpful experience as a child and a teenager in the Methodist Church. And so my kind of the reason I'm here is to make sure that we do better, to change it, to make sure that it isn't the church that it was 20 years ago or whatever. And sometimes I'm frustrated, obviously, because I've tried it, but that's what drives me, actually. And it's just interesting that I sort of sometimes look at the church and think, well, it's obvious that it's declining, but then I look at other people that sort of seem to be sort of thinking everything's fine and that the church is just ticking along, doing great. And I go, are you seeing what I'm seeing? But yeah, it's interesting.
Brian, you mentioned about obviously there being a decline in Methodist ministers, and I remember you saying that, has God stopped calling Methodist ministers? But I wonder is God calling people into different vocations, perhaps other ways of sort of ministering rather than becoming ministers, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. There are other factors. I'm in the church because of a very strong youth group in the church where I grew up. I was sent to Sunday school, and then when it came, I chose to join the youth club, which was very strongly Christian and making disciples. And I'm one of the products of that. And I believe that God was calling me into the ministry when I was somewhere between 18 and 19, and responded, went to college when I was 21 and 4 years in college, and I was out into circuit ministry mid-20s. The average age of somebody's training for the ministry at the moment is mid-40s. We haven't got many youth clubs in the old style, and the sort of seed bed of potential candidates for the ministry has moved on. And there are all sorts of other sociological factors. But equally, I think, and I use the term God's economy, it might be more realistic to be expecting God to call people in their middle years. In a way, it's much more challenging for them because they've got a career, they've started with a mortgage, they maybe have got a family, and the commitment. It was easy for me. I was 21. I got no ties. But for somebody in their mid years to answer the call, to give it all up, to consider selling the house and losing their place on the property, and all of that, and having a family to see through education and the moving, it all must come into play when people are hearing or choosing not to hear the call of God. For me, it was inescapable. I couldn't do anything in the end. I tried to run away, but it was inescapable, and I responded eventually to the call of God. Who knows if I had chosen it? But I think your point is equally valid, that ministry isn't just those of us who are paid and ordained to do the job. And one of the things about the growing point that I tried to make is that all of us have a responsibility for discipleship. And it isn't just the ministry. If you look, 99% of my time was spent in the life of the church. People who are in daily jobs are on the front line much more than a minister. I tried to seize opportunities of funerals and weddings and things where I really did come into contact with people that I wouldn't otherwise. But the expectation of the church is that the ministers are looking after the church. We might criticize that, but it's a fact of life. Whereas it's, and we're back to the education. How are we as ministers educating, training you as the people really on the front line to be disciples that enable growth?
Do you think that there's a sense of the fact that because for one reason or another that the Methodist Church has stopped being attractive to younger people, because we've stopped asking them these sorts of big questions that are, that try and seek answers for why we are here and what is out there, and that idea of faith?
Yeah, the youth club that I mentioned that was so influential in me, we met for social on a Saturday, we met for a devotional evening every Sunday, and it was a challenging time, and the programme was geared to challenge us, to introduce us to faith first of all, but then to challenge us to go deeper. And I'm still in touch with a whole raft of people that came through youth club in my batch, and still involved in the life of the church. One of the very sad things to me that I learned quite recently, you know the name Jonathan Edwards. He was the athlete who, does he still hold the world record for the triple jump? And
I think
he was an out and out evangelical Christian. And it came through his athletics, and I've seen a video where he talks about his faith and things. He was on television quite recently. He's lost his faith completely. He no longer even believes in God. Now that's both troubling and mysterious to me. God has grabbed hold of me and won't let me go, and that was part of the response of the sort of introduction that I had as a teenager. Years ago now, but still as a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things about Methodism, and there are still vestiges of this around, is that we were a very socially alert. We rolled up our sleeves. We were found in working communities. We've become smooth and smart and comfortable and safe. The raw edge has gone. The challenge. Now, that's not to decry all our faithful, loyal members who, through thick and thin, continue to support the church. And some of our people, there's a program at the moment, Thy Kingdom Come, a telecast. And I took part on behalf of the district this morning, and I spoke about the faithfulness of so many of our people who have maintained the church and their own faith alongside it. It's not just the rote of going to church, it is deep rooted. But Methodism perhaps needs to rediscover its cutting edge.
You mentioned about growing as well, Brian, and you ended up actually using John 15 with the idea of the roots and the stems and branches. And actually, I thought it worked beautifully with the whole theme of reimagining anyway, because it really did sort of give this great image and hammer it home of the fact that we are all responsible for church growth. And I just wondered if what you could kind of, what does that look like in action?
First and foremost, I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus Christ. In honesty, there are whole areas about God that remain beyond my capacity to think or even imagine. But I understand the humanness of Jesus. There was a phrase that I continued to come back to. Jesus was the man for others through his ministry, through his sacrificial death. That was for other people, not for him. And growing is growing like Jesus. And because we grow like Jesus, there is something attractive and that attracts people. I mean, as Paul said, I don't preach me. It's Jesus that I preach. And it's the absolute focus on Jesus, with all sorts of areas that are grey areas that we can't possibly ever fully understand or answer. But Jesus is the tangible part of God, the human face of the divine that we can grab hold of in our understanding.
So, sorry, the next question's got my face on it. So you mentioned on Sunday a quote that really stuck in my mind, which was that the church should be a school of love, which I thought was really interesting, and I've been thinking about since. But what in this context does love mean? What does love look like in the context of that quote, and for us as a church?
It is accepting other people because God loves us and God accepts us for who we are in spite of ourselves. There are no holds barred. And it is learning to accept. We hold other people at a distance, and if they're different from us, then the distance is greater. It is looking for the welfare and the well-being of the other person. We may not choose. It isn't a matter of choosing our friends in the life, although naturally we gravitate towards people, and friendship is very important in the church. But love is over and above the friendship groups that we have. It is this vital concern for the total well-being of one another, and not only within the confines of the church. It is reaching out in the name of Christ, and that to me is what Christian love is about.
Amen. Yeah.
We've got a bit of a different kind of follow-up question this week, because obviously, Brian, this is probably a bit unfair to make you answer this because you haven't really been around. But picking up on all of the themes that you said, unfortunately, I have them right in front of me: learning, changing, growing, and loving. Of those four things, It's basically just a kind of question to throw out there to the Romsey Methodist Church, to the people who are listening and watching. What have we been getting better at? Have we been learning? Have we been changing, growing, loving? What could we, where is there room to improve? Obviously, throw in some comments if you want to, or just maybe even sort of reflect on that this week, perhaps. Hopefully it will be a way for us to remember what you've been preaching on this week, Brian. I guess certainly when you were around to help with the renewal project, it was a question that you were constantly asking the church, where we sat, where are we intending to go? Are we learning? Are we changing, growing, loving? Is that something that you do with your other churches as well?
Yes, I mean, to me, and I've been involved in building renewal processes in a number of different places, and to me, I want to say two things. One is that the buildings are an important advert for what the church is. If you've got a dowdy church with out-of-date notices and run-down looking premises, what's the attraction? You wouldn't go into a bank or a building society or even a doctor's surgery that was visibly tatty and unwelcoming. And I think that the appearance of the church is a reflection of what we believe about God. Second best won't do for God. It needs to. We update our houses constantly, and it shows if we don't. And why not the church? But having said that, and I really believe that, and I, when I was involved with Romsey, I talked about welcoming, warm, hospitable, and a number of other adjectives that I use, and that's important to me. It's an advert for God. I heard one ministerial colleague talk about the buildings as sermons in stone. They speak to people outside passing on the street. So put that on one side. Far more importantly, the renewal of premises is about the renewal of our work. If we've got premises that we're proud of, that we can invite people to, we're more likely to do it. And the dad's program and what I heard on Sunday about the mums and the toddlers, and looking in through the window, I didn't go in, but looking in Fun Day Sunday, there were a group of parents of both genders in there with children actually enjoying them. I want people to come onto church premises and think it's good to be here, and not. I remember a story. One day I said, and I'd moved from Chandlersford to Wokingham, and at the end of a service, I'd said to people, now, I want you to go out and look happy, not as if you've just come from the dentist, but there was a dentist in the congregation. But you know what I mean?
I thought you were going to say, not as if you're just coming out from church.
But
I want people to believe that the church experience, that our worship experience, is worth turning up for, and that it's a good experience, and that it lifts our spirit and it sets us up for the week.
Yeah. Well,
it's good news to come to church.
Yeah. On your first,
don't bother.
yeah. But yes, on your first point about the warm welcome, one of the things that has been a huge, I think, difference at Romsey, it's silly, it's the heating, right? And the amount of times we're doing something in church and people walking up, oh, it's warm in here. Like, yes, of course it is. But just that difference in people's attitudes and expectation of coming into and getting a literal warm welcome, taking off a jumper because they haven't got to sit in a cold, drafty building, and can enjoy being in God's house. And it is amazing that just how many people do comment on that, expecting to see it's coming to this cold, musty building, but no, it's a warm kind of living room atmosphere. It is really nice.
I asked your father-in-law on Sunday morning, does the heating system work well? Because we spent a long time, we actually went to look at other church heating systems to make sure we got it right, so that it really was a place of a warm welcome as well as a welcome. And I was glad to hear that it did work.
It's fab.
Yeah, it is. I know we're a little short on time now, Brian, but I just want to get one last little question into you. Feel free to answer us swiftly. But we're obviously emerging fresh, new, jumping back into church again, and re-engaging with our community. And I just want to get a sense of how do we deal with change and growth, and all of this idea of learning and growing, whilst being sensitive to other people in the church, their ideas, their opinions, their callings. How do you deal with that clash?
Little question then, yeah.
Sorry.
How did we achieve the change? I mean, as Hilary said on Sunday morning, the congregation at Romsey had taught for years, decades. Somebody said they'd been talking about taking the pews out for 40 years. How did we do it without any real opposition? Oh, there were questions, particularly about that terrible organ that blocked up the view at the front. Hopefully we did it with love, because people learned that our motives in wanting to do things with Romsey Church were the right motives, the benefit of the congregation, and ultimately they trusted us to do it, that we were going to make things better rather than sacrifice their loved for generations sweeter premises. And it worked. And as I said on Sunday, I don't believe now there's anybody who would turn the clock back and go back to the way it was. And it was trust and confidence, and above all, love.
Yeah.
I mean,
people welcomed me and allowed me to take a lead. And it was all of us together. It was a whole church. That was just shown to me. We had the gift day, and nobody could believe that in one day we raised over £100,000. That was an impossibility, but it happened because people caught the vision, were excited by it, committed to it, and generous for it.
I think that the Romsey community is richer for it as well. The church has become more relevant to Romsey. Yeah.
Who let the dads out brings people in, and the church is for everybody. They may not want to come in, but we are there with doors open wide, at least metaphorically, for everybody to come in. And when people catch on to that, maybe they'll sit up and take notice.
Perfect.
Well, thank you. I think that was a great chat. Thank you both. Thank you, Brian, for joining us and answering all our tricky questions. Thank you. Thanks so much for your service on Sunday. It was fab. I really enjoyed it. It was great. It was very. I personally found it very uplifting and some good things to think about. And it's good to kind of. I think, as you mentioned, 7 years since renewal. I think it's an interesting point in time to be thinking, well, actually, okay, well, what is next as well for us? It's not just, we've done this thing, that's it now. It's what is next. Yeah. I think it's as you said with the end of as the lockdown ends and with us changing with the pandemic, I think it's a great time to be thinking about all these things. And thank you for coming back and helping us to think about it. It's been fab.
Good experience. Really glad to do so. Thank you for making this happen.
Thank you. Great. We're not here next week. In fact, we're not here for I don't know what's happening the week after, but it's certainly not here next week. We're having a week off. yeah, we're having a week off next week. But I'll end with a prayer, and then we'll go.
Super.
Father God, we thank you for Brian's word to us on Sunday. We thank you for your constant challenge to your call for us to learn, to change, to grow, and to love in your name, Lord. I pray that you would help us, you would show us where we need to be, or what we need to be learning, where we need to be changing, growing, who we need to take your love to, Lord, and loving how we can love people, our community, more in your name, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Brian.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.
See you then.